Well, good morning. Brad, where are you? Is in the room? It's good to be back in Brad's church. You know, the last time I was here was for a Kingdom Advisors one-day meeting, and I did a breakout in the junior high room, which has at the back of it a chain link fence. And I thought, man, this is a church that gets junior high ministry. They have the dude that's operating the sound equipment behind a locked chain link fence. So it's good to be back here. There's a sense of being home when you come back to a place that you've been before. And for me, there's a sense of home being back with financial advisors. As you heard in Mitch's introduction, I spent 14 years as an advisor and then as a practice manager. And I do indeed have a heart for what it is that you all do. You have the opportunity to profoundly impact people's lives. And so the idea that we're here today talking about how to do that in a kingdom-focused, faith-forward sort of way gives me an additional degree of comfort as well as an additional sense of responsibility as I stand up here and speak with you this morning. Several years ago, I was in Seattle, Washington, working with a client, and it was on a Thursday, Friday, and at the time, our oldest son was in his first year of college at a college in the Seattle area. And so I said, Brett, when I'm done working on Friday, let's get together first thing Saturday morning and go down to Mount Rainier, park our car in what's known as Paradise. How many of you been to Mount Rainier in Washington State? There's an area right at about 5,000 feet that's called Paradise, aptly named. It really is Paradise. And hike up about halfway up Mount Rainier to an area called Camp Muir, which is right at about the 10,000 foot level. That was the plan. Well, I got a little bit of a late start leaving Seattle, getting down, picking up Brett at college, getting down to Paradise. And so it was about noon when we set out, and we were about halfway up the glacier up to Camp Muir when there's these two guys coming down from Camp Muir that stopped us on our trek up and said, we'd advise you to turn around right away. The weather is really changing rapidly. And Brett and I took a look at them, and they weren't wearing like the latest REI sort of stuff that had just walked out of the showroom yesterday. They looked like grizzled veterans of mountains. And so we took their advice seriously, hiked up only another couple minutes, took a wonderful panoramic shot, turned around, started walking back down, and no sooner had we turned than we were enveloped in a whiteout. How many of you ever been in a whiteout where everything just goes instantly white, and your eyes are trying to figure out which is left and which is right, what's up, what's down. You lose all sense of perspective almost immediately when you're enveloped in this cloud bank, this whiteout. And so we literally, both of us literally had dots dancing in our field of vision as our eyes were trying to get some sense of perspective, perception. We were a long ways from Paradise at that point. And I didn't have any sense that we were in imminent grave danger because we weren't at a place where there were crevasses that we could fall into. It wasn't likely that we were going to die on our way back to Paradise, but it was very likely that we could have easily gotten lost because we had no sense of perception of where we were, except that there was something that the United States Park Service had done on the glacier up to Camp Muir. They had planted wands about every 10 feet. So if you could find your way 10 feet to the next wand, 10 feet to the next wand, 10 feet to the next wand, you would find your way right back to Paradise. That's the picture I'd like you to have in your mind's eye as I start this morning. What I'm going to try to do in the next 50 minutes is lay out a couple of wands for you. Based on what Mitch just shared with you, the perspective that he's given around biblical financial advice, I want to plant some wands, a pathway, if you will, that if you follow these wands, that you can actually lead not only yourselves, but your clients to Paradise. That you can lead them in a path that will give them a clear direction where they won't get lost. Because let me ask a very simple question here. Who is your competition as advisors? Who's your competition? Is it Northwestern Mutual, TD Ameritrade? Is it Robo-Advisors? Is it Ameriprise? Is it Thrivent Financial? Is it any of those? No. They are not your competition. Your competition is consumerism. All the messaging and marketing that your clients and prospects are being inundated, and you as well, and me as well, inundated every day, is absolutely diametrically opposed to a biblical worldview about money. That's your competition. And your competition is really fierce, and so is mine. And so how do we not get lost? How do we not get caught in a whiteout? How do we not completely lose our perspective? Let me try to lay out a couple of simple wands for us this morning that we can follow one after another. Simple. Here's the disclaimer. Before I really dive into it, though, nothing is as simple as anything I'm going to put on the screen here this morning. This would be so easy. Advising people would be so easy if it didn't involve humans, right? Because every one of them is an experiment of one. Every one of them has their own story, their own life experiences, their own place in their faith journey. And so it's complicated. But let me try to give a couple of simple questions, simple process, simple steps that hopefully you can incorporate into your practice starting this afternoon that will be practical and usable to you. Here's the picture of it. There's really three parts to the financial advice process. Part of it is looking back, the past. Part of it is the present, where are you right now? And part of it is looking forward, what are the possibilities? Okay, that's simple enough? Past, present, possibilities. But before we even delve into the advice process, we need to have all of us need to have a clear point of view. Actually, the point of view is way more important than the process. The point of view is way more important than the process. And so let's start with a point of view. Point of view is an answer to the question, what do you stand for? Having a clear point of view and really not just knowing it in your head, but having it in your heart matters greatly. In the late 18th century, hundreds of ships would pass by Nantucket Island almost on a daily basis. But because the Atlantic in that region is a particularly dangerous body of water with hidden shoals and tricky winds and storms that would blow up fast, and none of the navigational equipment that we have today, many of those ships sank, and thousands of sailors perished. And so the people of Massachusetts banded together looking at this tragic situation because many of the people perished within a mile of shore. So they banded together and formed what was originally called the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Humane Society. If you ever wondered why they call it the Animal Humane Society, I always wondered that. It's like, is there any other? There was actually originally the Human Humane Society in Massachusetts. And this group of people banded together and built what were called huts of refuge, where they would put a lifeboat, some life-saving equipment, they would put in food and provisions, blankets, so that when the warning flare would go up, indicating that a ship was going down, people would run to the nearest hut of refuge, grab the boat and the life-saving equipment, and they would rush out into the sea to try to save the sailors that were dying with the ship that was going down. The motto of the original Humane Society was, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back in. How many of you would sign up for that? You have to go out, but you don't have to come back in. Well, actually, lots of people did sign up for that. They were in the life-saving business. Their point of view was, we have to go out. We may not necessarily come back in. That was the point of view. Well, over time, the Humane Society began to turn over their life-saving work to what is now called the U.S. Coast Guard. The U.S. Coast Guard. And the huts of refuge, one by one, you can still go visit them, dotting the landscape along the Massachusetts shore, one by one, they became either museums or yacht clubs. Not many yacht clubs in the life-saving business. It's important to have a point of view. And for that point of view, for you to feel the full gravity of the point of view that you have as financial advisors who are Christian financial advisors that are trying to orient people so they don't get lost on their way to paradise, to orient them with a biblical point of view. Or you may become a yacht club. And most yacht clubs are social and irrelevant. Now, historically, the financial services industry has been more focused, I can say this having been in it for 14 years, having sat in many of your shoes, having sat at the table with countless clients. Historically, the financial services industry has been more about form than essence. Let me explain what I mean. Form is what you see on the outside. Everything has both form and essence. Leaders have a form and an essence, what you see on the outside versus what's on the inside. An organization, a team, a marriage, a church has a form and it has an essence. Form is what forms our first impression. When we first encounter a person, when we first walk in the door of this church, what we're first encountering is its form. Is form important? Is form important? Yeah, why? First impression. It's how we form our first impression. We live increasingly, I would say, in a world that is first impression driven. We live in a world, an Instagram, YouTube sort of world. We're in the Olympics of first impressions right now, also known as the presidential election, right? Where it's all about sound bites and what you see in these 2-minute, 1-minute, 30-second, 10-second snippets on the news. You know what an enormous amount of time on Good Morning America, for a guest to have an enormous amount of time, you know what that would be on Good Morning America? Like 2 minutes, right? Okay, let's talk about the starving children in Uganda. Okay, we're moving now over to this subject, which is completely unrelated, right? 2 minutes. So we live in a form-based world, but behind all of that is essence, the essential of what a person or a church or an organization or you as an advisor, what's on the inside. The picture on the screen here is of an acorn and an oak tree, because embedded in every acorn is what? A whole forest of oak trees, actually, right? The form, the acorn, is what you see on the outside. The essence of it is this oak tree. Give it some water, some time, some light, some nutrients, and it's going to grow up to be an oak tree. It cannot grow up to be a Douglas fir or a paper birch, as hard as it tries. It's going to be some form of an oak tree. You have form as an advisor, how you present, how you carry yourself, how articulate you are, and you have essence. Here's the key point. Form should match the essence. What shows up on the outside, how you show up on the outside, how you show up with your clients should match truly what's your essence, your essential qualities, what's in your heart, inside. We call that integrity. The root word of the word integrity is integer, whole, to be a whole person. The words that used many times in Scripture is wholehearted. David was commended for being wholehearted. Joshua was commended for being wholehearted. Caleb, in the biblical account of what retirement should look like, at age 80-something, he says, give me that mountain because I'm not done working for the Lord. And he was commended for being wholehearted in his pursuit of God's will. Wholehearted. He was a man of integrity. His form, his outside, matched what's on the inside. Funny story about this. A number of years ago, I was going to speak with a group of pastors and seminarians and evangelists in Ghana, West Africa. And I was going to try to demonstrate this point of form and essence to this group of about 125 faith leaders in Ghana. And I knew that there would be a lot of different dialects in the room. And so I thought, how am I going to get this point across? Well, sitting in my office in Minnesota, I thought it would be brilliant to take 2 bags of acorns from my backyard, 2 Ziploc bags, zip them up, put them into my luggage, and bootleg them through customs. Brilliant. Amazingly, they got through customs, which makes me wonder a little bit about the TSA. But I'm making this point to an audience just like you in an open-air classroom in Accra, Ghana, and it gets to that climatic moment. I zip open the 2 bags and I start walking through the audience, giving each one in the audience an acorn as I'm walking back through. And I get about to this point when I hear crunching. I go, oh, snap! And I go running back up front, and the person sitting right here who had actually quite good English says, how do you prepare these? Here was the point, though, and no pun intended. The group that was there was hungry. The description that a good friend of mine makes is the difference between being a learner and a knower. A learner and a knower. The most important quality, perhaps, these days, as any professional, is to be a learner, not a knower. That you're inquisitive, you're curious. That's why you're here this morning, because you're learners. You want to learn more about this. How do I practice this? And so how do we act with integrity, where our form matches our essence, where what we're speaking and saying and modeling and doing matches our core point of view? You heard this from Mitch. Here's a point of view. Here's the summary of Mitch's talk. First point of view, God owns it all. Stop right there. How easy is that to practice? How easy is that to practice? It's really difficult to practice that. I was at the Kingdom Advisors annual meeting earlier this year, and I heard this time and time again from Ron, from other speakers at the Kingdom Advisors annual meeting, and breakout sessions from the main stage. God owns it all. And intellectually, I go, yep. Spiritually, I go, okay. Emotionally, I go, whew, that's not easy. God owns it all. Second point of the point of view is that, and God has delegated to us what we do with his stuff. It's called stewardship. You heard Mitch use the S word earlier this morning. Stewardship. And third point, God has a point of view about money, and it's actually very clear. God's point of view is very clear. Scripture speaks more about money than any other single subject. Jesus speaks about money more than any other subject other than the kingdom of God. There's a lot of things that Jesus isn't as clear about as money and possessions and stuff, actually. And so God has a point of view about money, and it's quite clear. And then finally, and you heard Mitch make this point this morning too, God will hold us accountable for how we steward his stuff. And he's going to hold all of our clients accountable as well, which puts a great opportunity in front of us and also a burden of responsibility on us as advisors. So how do we lead them? What are the wands that we're going to give to them to lead them through a process that will help them to be wiser stewards of his stuff? That's what we're talking about here this morning. So let me give you one essential question for each of the 3 parts of the planning process. So in past, as we're looking back, as we're helping our clients or prospects look back, an essential question that will begin to be able to communicate a biblical point of view is really simply, what's your story? What's your story? A lot of advisors I've seen, and I was guilty of this as an advisor as well, were a lot more interested in their story than in their client's story, in having a really slick elevator talk. I've got to be able to tell my story and my company's story, especially in the first 10 minutes of my time. It's because this client has to be desperately interested in my story and my company's story. Wrong. They're more interested in their story than they are in your story. So why don't we ask them what their story is? A number of years ago, I was sitting in the back seat as my father and mother were in the front seat, and Carol and I were in the back seat, and we were driving away from the church service that we had just attended at the church that I grew up in what is now inner city Milwaukee. My parents still drive 35 minutes from north of Milwaukee down to the inner city every Sunday morning to go to their home church. They're 88 years old. Kind of ups my prayer life just thinking about them driving, 35 minutes to church in inner city Milwaukee. And we're driving away from church, and we're about 2 blocks away, and my father points to this house. And he says, that's the house that I grew up in. I don't know if you knew that. Now, my father is not an emotive man. I mean, for him to be really, really emoting is to look at my shoes instead of his own, right? So I mean, he's a very private, very, kind of stoic German guy. And so he says, this is the house that I grew up in. And I did the Scooby-Doo when he did. They went, what? He goes, then he continued on with his story, a very little bit of which I knew. He said, I grew up in that house. I think you know this. My father died when I was 6 years old. He dropped dead of a heart attack in front of me when we were washing the car on Sunday morning. The tradition in his family, his father's tradition, was to wash the car every Sunday morning before they would drive to church. And his father was washing the car with my dad, little boy, 6 years old, when he dropped dead of a heart attack, right in front of him. Actually caused my father for many years after that to stutter. It was so traumatic. A year later, my grandmother, who never remarried and never had a driver's license until she passed at age 96. My grandmother, a year later, had to sell the family house because my father hadn't done a proper amount of, my grandfather, who I never met, hadn't planned properly, and caused them to move into this house, into the upper story of this house, this duplex, which was a 2-bedroom duplex. She had to sublet out the other bedroom to help her pay the rent. And my father and my uncle lived in a 3-season porch, 4 seasons out of the year, in Milwaukee. If you were my father's financial advisor, would that be a good story to know? Would that be a good story to know? Do you think that life experience had any impact on his view of money and possessions and who owns what and how quickly things can change? The importance of faith as it intersects with money? Do you think any of that is mixed into his story? Absolutely. And I didn't learn it until he was 86, and I was 57. It matters a great deal that we first and foremost learn our client's story. Mitch is a master of asking questions. It's one of the many qualities that I really admire in him. Here's some of the questions I've learned from him as they pertain to this first part of the process. Where did you grow up? That's a pretty simple question. It just starts the conversation. What was your first experience money? What was money like growing up for you? Best financial experience, worst financial experience? What did you learn from those experiences? 3 lessons that you would want to pass along to children or grandchildren or important young people in your life before you pass away. Have you had a defining life experience? Do you think this was a defining life experience for my father? Absolutely. It defined his view for the rest of his life about money. It's important that we know this about our clients. So let's do this for 3 minutes, and I'm going to try to draw you back at the end of this, which is probably going to be almost impossible. Take question number 3. What was money like growing up? Turn to the person sitting next to you. Ask him or her that question. If they don't look like a nice person, turn the other direction. Talk to the other person. Ask them that question. Just have a very quick conversation. 3 minutes. I'm going to call you back. Okay? Go. Go. All right. Come on back. Come on back. Come on back. Boy, 3 minutes goes fast, doesn't it? Boom, just like that. How was that conversation? Good? Amazing, isn't it? How when you ask a question and are authentically interested, that's the key point here. When you ask a question and you're authentically interested in the answer, what happens? I had a great first mentor in financial services when I first started as a dripping wet behind the ears financial advisor. I had an older gentleman who was my first manager, and He was a guy that had a lot of really odd sayings, actually. Most of the time, you had no idea what he was talking about when he had all of these aphorisms and sayings. So, for example, one of his favorite sayings, and he used it frequently, was, "John, when you see a turtle on a fence post in the countryside, you know it didn't get there by itself." I had no idea what he was talking about, right? He's talking about the thermodynamics of, I don't know what he was talking about. But one of the terrible pieces of advice, and there were only a few, but one of the terrible pieces of advice he gave me as a brand new financial advisor, exactly opposite actually of what you were just hopefully doing, was never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. Bad advice. Think about Jesus. Master questioner. Matter of fact, as you read the four Gospels, his primary, almost exclusive way of teaching was to ask questions, not to give simple or simplistic answers. Depending upon which translation, give or take, he asks about 125 discrete questions in the four Gospels. About 125. His answer to most questions asked of him was to ask a question. Sometimes to tell a story. Occasionally, if that didn't work, he'd do a miracle. But he almost always asked questions, right? Questions, perplexing questions, odd questions, ill-timed questions. And for the vast majority of the time, he was asking questions not because he was leading the witness or because he already knew the answer. He just wanted to lead the person to his answer. I honestly believe he asked the question because, you know what? He was curious. He wanted to know how the person was going to answer this question. The boat's going down in the middle of the night. The disciples are terribly afraid. And he says, "Why are you so afraid?" Because we're about to drown. No, he really wants to know, why haven't you gotten this yet? Why aren't you faithful? So, first point here. Ask questions. If you're looking for the wand in this first area called past in the financial pathway, the wand is narrative before numbers. Get to know their story before you even begin to talk for a second about numbers. Narrative before numbers is the first wand in this part of the pathway called the past. With me so far? Second part of the process is the present. The essential question here is, what matters to you? Again, historically, many of us have been raised, I was raised in this one, I was a financial advisor and then a practice manager to practice the six-step financial planning process. When I was working on getting my certified financial planning degree, I memorized the 6 steps. The steps are, first of all, establish the relationship, then gather data, then analyze the information, then recommend solutions, then implement the recommendations, and finally to monitor the recommendations. Does this look familiar to you? These are the 6 steps in the financial planning process as laid out by the FPA, as ascribed to by certified financial planners. They're wonderful steps. It's form. There's nothing unique about this. There's nothing distinct about this. Practicing this is important. You know how I remembered it, by the way, for the CFP exam? If you play it backwards, it spells out mirage. That's how I remembered it. And in fact, you can lead clients through this process and create for them a mirage of security if they're placing all of their trust in their stuff. Plus, we're taught as financial advisors to focus just on this part of their stuff, right? Their financial dimensions. This pretty much covers the waterfront of a person's finances: wealth transfer and estate planning, income tax planning, investments, risk management, cash flow, charitable planning, retirement planning, so forth. Is there anything missing from this list? No, it's quite comprehensive. It's all there. Except that if we only focus on this, and if we only practice those 6 steps, we're likely to create a mirage for our clients, because it will most likely be steeped in a worldview versus a biblical worldview. And Lee Eisenberg, in his book, The Number, a number of years ago, best-selling book, don't read the book. Just here's the point of the book. Okay, I'm going to give it to you so you can save yourself 272 pages. This is on page 273. Lee says, while online calculators and magazine worksheets are freely available, most conventional aids are deaf and dumb to what it takes to lift your spirits and make your heart sing. A financial plan without a meaning plan leads straight to the thudding realization that, duh, all the money in the world doesn't buy happiness. Do you agree? Of course. Now, I don't know if Leah's a believer or not. There's nothing particular biblical in the book. As a matter of fact, just the title of the book gives you the idea that it probably misses the point, because all of the messaging and marketing of a lot of financial services companies talks about reaching the number. What's your number? As if that's important. It isn't important. It actually leads us to a bad view of retirement, that I'm going to work until I get this number, and then I'm going to live a life of leisure for the rest of my life because I've got enough, and my security is in the number. Wrong. But the point of this quote is exactly spot on. There needs to be more to it than just online calculators. For a number of years, I've been a part of a program with a global company out in the Pacific Northwest. Once a year, they offer this to their executives and their spouse or partners. For executives that are within 3 to 5 years of retirement, there's a couple of year waiting period to get into the program. It's a 2.5-day program that's called Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. It's actually a brilliant kind of holistic look at a person's finances that takes a look at their benefits through the company. They're actually one of those companies that still has benefits. It's amazing. There's a few of them out there yet. A pension plan, Social Security, Medicare, estate planning, charitable planning, but it's all in the context of a person's whole life. And the question that we ask the participants, the first question, the first evening, before we kind of dive into the content, is 2 questions about, as they think about the next stage of their life, these 2 questions. What are you most excited about as you think about the next stage of your life? What are you most excited about? What do you think we hear? What do you think? Travel, what else? What? Freedom, sure. Yeah, what else? Grandkids always comes up. Okay, what else? This is the audience participation part. What else? Just thought I'd give you a clue, all right? What else? Excited about. What are you excited about? That comes up, okay? Or some other form of leisure, depending upon what it is, right? Then the next question is, and what are you most concerned about as you think about the next stage of your life? And the same 3 for 10 years in a row always come up. The order might be different, but the exact same 3 every time are always the first 3 that come up. And what do you think they are? Health is one. How do I stay healthy? How do I get healthy? Will I outlive my health? How do I pay for my health insurance? All of that in the bucket called health. What's another one? Number 2. Purpose. Oh, good. Who said that? Bingo. Exactly. Some form or another purpose always comes up. Will I leave behind what I hope and intend to leave behind? A deep concern about legacy. Ken Dykewald, the guy who is the head of the organization called AgeWave, who's done a lot of consulting with financial service companies, has done a lot of research on this topic and finds that, no surprise, people are way more concerned about passing along their values than their valuables. And that falls into the purpose bucket. And then what's the third? Financial. Will I have enough money? Will I outlive my money? How do I make the best use of my money? How do I pass along my money? We did some research a number of years ago with MetLife under an organization that they had sponsored at the time called the Mature Market Institute. And the research showed that the 3 concerns, the same 3 buckets that come up just in the conversation with these executives at this global company, are money, medicine, and meaning. Money, medicine, and meaning. And so there's an interest not just in financial. So if we're only following these 6 steps and if we're only focused on their money, we're missing the point. We have to take more of a holistic approach and have that approach grounded in the point of view of God owns it all, and we're here to steward it, and we're going to be held accountable at some point for how we do that. And it needs to not just be stewarding our finances, but stewarding our whole life. God owns all of it. He's given us all of it. It's all a gift. So how do we wisely steward all of it? Not just our money, but all of this, our health, our learning, our relationship with family, our work, our relationship with loved ones, our spiritual life, our friendships. It's all to be stewarded wisely. Let's talk about finances just for a second. You heard Mitch reference this. Those of you, how many of you have been to either Kingdom Advisors one-day meeting or the annual meeting? How many of you? Okay, maybe about half of you. So you've heard this concept before. If you've gone through the core training or been a part of a study group or heard Ron speak, you've heard the idea that there's 5 uses of money that kind of fall into 4 categories of owe, grow, live, give. We owe money in the form of taxes and debt. We're growing money in the form of savings. There are living expenses, including protection, and there's generosity. And so again, the counsel here is that we're here to help our clients steward their finances in these 4 buckets wisely. I love this quote from Wesley Wilmer. He says that stewardship is God's way of raising people, not man's way of raising money. It's God's way of raising people. And God's ways are often about challenging and shaping our values. Fundamentally in life, we don't do what we believe. We do what we value. So if you want to see what a person truly values, the litmus test, simple litmus test, is to look at their calendar and their checkbook, or however they keep track of their finances. Because where we spend our time and where we invest our money are indicative of truly what we value, not just what we believe. And God has a way of challenging those values. So the first wand is narrative before numbers. The wand in this category, I would say, is values before valuables. It's vital that in the process, as we're stewarding our relationship with our client through this financial planning process, faith-forward financial process, it's vital that we know their values so that the advice that we give them is in alignment with their core values and that those values are in alignment with what God values because He has a point of view about money, about stuff, and about possessions. And it's pretty clear. Here's the third essential question, and it's what are your dreams and goals? What are your dreams and goals? I live in Minneapolis. We're held hostage by Delta Airlines in Minneapolis. I just read yesterday in the business section of the Star Tribune, or the day before, there's a new CEO of Delta Airlines just taking over. In the article, there was this little statistic in the article that said 70% of Delta's flights either emanate from or fly through Minneapolis. And Delta controls about 85% of the gates at Minneapolis Airport, the main airport. It's not a great airport if you're looking for a deal on flying, right? Because they're a hub for Delta Airlines. Well, I fly a non-Delta flight about once or twice a year. Occasionally, I'll fly an American Airlines flight. I accumulate about 450 to 600 miles on American Airlines a year. And so after a number of years of racking up all of these miles on American Airlines, I got this great offer in the mail for I can parlay my miles, which at that point had accumulated to about a whopping 2,500 miles on American Airlines. I could parlay the miles for magazines. You ever seen this offer? I thought, this is awesome. I can use miles to buy magazines that I don't have to read and feel guilty when I don't read them because I've just used miles on an airline that I'll never get a free flight from, ever, right? And so one of the first magazines that I subscribed to years ago is no longer in print. I'm so sorry that it's not, because it was an awesome publication called National Geographic Adventure. It kind of married up the beautiful imagery of National Geographic with articles all about adventure, where you could go, what you could see, what you could do. And the tagline of the magazine, right in the upper right-hand corner of the magazine, was "Dream it, plan it, do it." This is a great tagline for this third step in the process with our clients or prospects in this area of possibilities. Start with dreams. Start with dreams. Don't start with goals. Start with dreams. And, in the words of John Ortberg, says, have some of those dreams be born in a burden. People of faith feel a burden for things. And if we ask some questions and really get to the nub of it with our clients, we can uncover what they dream about, what causes them to be emotional, what causes them to tear up, the causes that they are drawn to, the type of thing that once you hear a person speak in your church, you would want to take them out to lunch and then buy them a truck. That's a dream. We need to ask questions of our clients to get to those with our clients. What do you dream about? And to not just have those be in financial areas, but in their whole life again. Have them be in these 10 different categories, these life dimensions. What do you dream about with your health? What do you dream about in your relationships? What do you dream about in your spiritual life? What are your dreams that you have in regards to your work, the next stage of your work? What do you dream about with your hobbies? What kind of dreams do you have? And some of those are born out of a burden that you feel for a dent that you're going to make in the world, either right in your neighborhood or somewhere a long ways away. Here's a funny version of this. When our older son was 16 years old in high school, they challenged everyone in that class, the class that he was taking in high school, to put together a 50-50 list. 50 things you want to do before you die. It's kind of like the kids' version of a bucket list, right? 50 things I want to do before I die. So with his permission, here was Brett's original, and this is, I'll share with you why this is important in a second, but here was Brett's original 50-50 list, a couple of items off of his, now give him some slack, he was 16 at the time, okay, so just cut him some slack. So number 1 was Summit Mount Rainier. Check, he's done it. Number 2, learn how to fly fish. Check, he's done that. Number 4, live in a different country for a year. Hasn't done that yet. He traveled abroad, he studied abroad. Number 14, finish college in 4 years. Actually, I put that on the list. Hey, you know, he didn't do it, by the way, either. He came to me when he was a junior in college and said, Dad, I want to do an internship. I go, oh, really? What's your internship, Brett? He goes, it's in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. He snowboarded 92 straight days. That was his internship. So he got through it in 5 years, not 4. So number 22, make a great difference in one person's life. He's done that. Number 28, conquer my fear of the ocean. He's done that, okay? There's some odd things on the original list. Number 6 was be a mountain bum for 3 years and live off the wilderness and scrappy day jobs. I love that one. He didn't do that, thankfully. Number 46, make the front page in a newspaper for sports or business. That could either be really good or really bad if you think about it. Mostly bad, not good. Number 50, which he swore for years that he hadn't done, and then his brother ratted him out and said, oh yes, he has. Go 150 miles per hour in a car. Not in any of my cars, I can assure you, but here's the point. Of the original 50, at this point, at age 30, he's checked off 23 of the 50. And a number of them, even starting at age 16, were born out of a burden. So the wand here is dreams before deadlines. Dreams before deadlines. Because the saying for goals is that they're dreams with deadlines. So before we get to goal setting with our client, we need to help them to think bigger. To think bigger. The story that Mitch told right at the end of his talk of this financial advisor that wants to work with this church, not even his clients, but wants to move $500 million into the kingdom. Now that's a dream, and that's born out of a burden that he feels deep inside. And it starts with that. It starts with a dream. And then you start to lay out a plan. And then you start to set timelines. And then you start to count the cost. But it starts with, first of all, having a dream. We need to encourage our clients to dream more, because when they're not dreaming anymore, they're dying. So how do we encourage them to dream? Let's look back just for a second at this. Let's just talk finances for just a minute, since that's the realm that many of us spend the majority of our time with our clients in, is in the realm of finances. So back to this illustration of live, give, grow. What if the dream that we help cast with our clients is to change the parameters of this over time. So we're moving money. We're helping them move money from owing to growing. From owing taxes, from owing debt to growing. And what comes as a result of that is a greater sense of freedom. And we're helping them to move money from living to giving. And with that comes a greater sense of purpose. I was talking about biblically based, faith-forward financial advice with a group of people, and there was a pastor who, this was in Fort Collins, Colorado, there was a pastor that was sitting in the group, and I asked the question, so if you had to describe what faith-forward or what Christian financial advice is, how would you describe it? And we had like 25 people in the room, we had 25 different answers, and then the pastor said, well, at the end of the day, no matter what, it has to result in greater generosity. It has to, because when you look at all of the teaching in Scripture, all of the verses about money, all the things that Jesus said, it's very clear, painfully clear, that he has a heart for the poor, and that he has a heart for generosity, and that because he owns it and we're stewarding it, he wants us to hold on to it loosely and give it generously. So what if we're helping our clients move from living expenses to giving more, to moving money into the kingdom? This takes courage. It takes courage to have these conversations. It takes courage to practice this first and foremost ourselves, to hold on loosely to it ourselves. May 2nd, 2012, I was with a group of executives in New York City. And this was a particularly stressful group, very demanding. A very stressful program that I was facilitating all day from 8 in the morning until 6 o'clock at night with this group of executives. And so my customary practice is to take my cell phone, just like I did this morning, to have it in my bag in the back of the room and to just put it on ignore for the day, just turn it to silent. But this day, because I knew it was going to be so demanding of my attention, not just my head, but my heart, my whole self with this group of executives, I turned the phone completely off, which I seldom do, actually. Turned the phone completely off as soon as I started in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. And at 6 o'clock, as soon as I was done with the day, just exhausted, I turned my phone back on. I powered it back up, and there's a message at 10 o'clock in the morning from my wife, Carol. Hey, when you have a minute, please give me a call. And then at 1 o'clock, it's like, hey, would you please call home? And at 3 o'clock, the message was, where are you? Please call. Do you feel your anxiety rising? Mine's like, whoo. I'm going, oh man, I wonder what's going on. So I immediately called Carol's cell phone, and Josh, our younger son, answers the phone. I go, oh no, what's going on? Josh, what's going on? Mom's been trying to reach me all day. What's going on? He goes, how do you feel about getting a puppy? I didn't know whether to be angry or relieved, or I said, well, why do you ask? He goes, well, we're in the car. I answered Mom's phone because she's driving. We're in the car. We're on our way up to Maple Grove, just north of where we live, to look at a puppy. Here's our puppy. He's 4 years old now. Actually, this is not our golden retriever, Cody. He's 4.5 years old. He would never, ever sit still to have a ball sit on his nose, ever. We've had 3 golden retrievers before him. They've all been female. This is the first male that we've owned. You know, it's not only humans. There's a difference in dogs between men and women. I'm just here to tell you. And so this dog is crazy. Crazy. We've installed an electric fence. It's kind of like the metered ramps. He kind of treats it as a suggestion. It's like, hey, that felt pretty good. You know, he's off and running. Here's what this reminded me of, though, just thinking about my dog and thinking about you. You didn't think I was going to put those two in the same sentence, did you? It's this wonderful quote. My courage is a wild dog. It's like my wild dog. It doesn't come when I call it. I have to chase it down and hold on as tight as I can. Practicing what Mitch and I have talked about this morning takes some courage. It takes courage to hold on to your point of view so that you don't become a yacht club. It takes courage to ask questions that you don't know the answer to that are grounded in the core point of view. It takes courage to lean into your client's values before you talk about their valuables. It takes courage to encourage them to dream and to dream big. It takes courage for you to dream big and have some of those dreams be anchored in a burden that God has placed on your heart. It takes courage to part with your money, to hold on to it loosely, to give it generously to the burdens that God has placed on your heart, the dreams that He's planted in your head and in your heart. All of this takes courage, which is why it's so wonderful that you're here today. Because it's difficult to do this, almost impossible to do this alone. That's why it's so important, the rhythm of Kingdom Advisors, where they have these one-day meetings, just to give you some encouragement. The annual meeting, which is the best gathering, bar none, in the financial services business. The study groups that meet monthly, because iron sharpens iron, holding each other accountable to this, practicing this together, because you're going to find yourself down dark alleys, asking questions you don't know the answer to, and the answer that comes back is not at all what you expected. So the courage to do that, it's like a wild dog. It doesn't come when you call it. You have to grab onto it and hold on tightly to it. And so I'm delighted that you're here today. And I hope that something that Mitch and I and Ron and Rob are saying just absolutely cements in your heart, though, that this is exactly where you're supposed to be, that God has called you to do this, that you're here to swim upstream against the tide of consumerism that's just like a rushing torrent and getting worse every day. That's why you're here. So thanks for being here.